Welcome to the final question on language paper 2. So today we're going to be looking at question 5. If you haven't watched the previous videos in this series, then I'd recommend that you go back and do that now. So question 5 asks you to write to persuade or argue. You need to write about 2 to 3 sides of non-fiction writing. You've got 40 marks for this question and it's about 45 minutes. Let's start by looking at what is actually being assessed on this section of the paper. So first of all, you get 24 marks for your content and organisation. And that means that your communication is convincing and compelling. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about how we can use narrative in this section of the paper in order to make our writing compelling, interesting for our reader. Convincing also means that you've got lots of ideas and lots of detail and it reads like a persuasive text. And that also comes in this second bullet point too, that your tone, style and register are matched to the purpose and the audience. And that means that if you're asked to write a newspaper article, that you write in the style of a newspaper article. You don't accidentally write, a description of a mysterious night or something, that you've read the question properly and that you're matching your answer to the question. You've also got to use extensive and ambitious vocabulary. Now, that's what the mark scheme says, but I always warn my students that that means appropriate vocabulary. I do not want to see writing that is really clogged up with just all of the good words that you can think of. I want you to use those words with particular reasons in mind and to use them appropriately. You need to show sustained crafting of linguistic devices. Sustained means that you use the devices all the way through your writing. So they're not all kind of packed in one paragraph, but that you have that all the way through. A really nice idea, which we'll look at in another video, is using a motif to create a real sense of coherence and to show that you're crafting, that you're carefully constructing those linguistic devices and not just shoving them in where you think they should go. Then we need to have varied and inventive use of structural features, and I'm going to show you in this video how we can use a circular structure in our persuasive writing. We need a range of convincing and complex ideas, so make sure that your ideas are reasonable. In terms of them being complex, we're not looking for things that are overly simplistic. We're going to look at a text about work experience today. So for example, we're not just saying work experience is good and work experience is bad and kind of ending there, but we're kind of unpicking the reasons that underlie that. And as well as that, we need fluently linked paragraphs with discourse markers. So our paragraphs need to follow logically one to the next. So you might be saying, firstly or after that or as a consequence, using those connectives and those discourse markers to show your line of argument. We also get 16 marks for technical accuracy. So firstly, we need good sentence demarcation, and that means basically having your full stops in the correct place, your capital letters and so on, all in the correct place. Then we need a wide range of punctuation used accurately. For a wide range, I would suggest that you use about 7 different types of punctuation, obviously not all in the same sentence or paragraph, but across your whole 2 to 3 pages. We need a full range of sentence forms for effect. So we shouldn't be reading lists of sentences which say, the person did this, then the person did that, then the person did this. We're having a range of sentence forms, and again, I'm going to show you how I would do that. We need to be able to use standard English and complex grammatical structures. So we'll talk a little bit about that in another video, I think. You need to use accurate spelling, especially if you're using more complex words. And again, it says extensive and ambitious use of vocabulary, but as I've already said, this means vocabulary that's appropriate. So let's look at an example question then, and the first thing we're going to do is gap the question. So we're going to look for the genre, the audience and the purpose of the question. And this just helps us to meet the tone and the style and the register as specified on the mark scheme. So it says, it is essential for young people to have opportunities to complete work experience or to have a part-time job. This is the only activity which will truly prepare them for the world of work. Write an article. So that's the genre, the type of text that you're being asked to write. Write an article for a magazine in which you explain your point of view on this statement. So the magazine gives us the audience. It's going to be a little bit more informal than if you're writing for a newspaper, but probably more formal than if you were giving a speech to a classmate or something. And the purpose is to explain your point of view on the statement. And then the exam paper reminds you about the marks, which we've already discussed. In this video, I'm just going to show you how to write a fairly basic response to this question, and then in subsequent videos I'm going to show you how to layer different techniques on top of that which might elevate your answer. But first of all, as with everything, we need to plan, and in order to do that we're going to use a table to gather our ideas for and against the statement. So first of all, if we're agreeing with the statement, we're saying yes, students should do work experience. And if we're disagreeing, we're thinking no, other aspects of education are more important. Okay, so I'm going to write down my ideas in no particular order, and then I'm going to organise them afterwards. So first of all, I think work experience helps young people to develop independence and confidence. It also helps them to understand how the working world works. Maybe thinking about interviews there, or coping with challenges in the workplace, because of course dealing with a problem at work is quite different from dealing with it at school, because you don't necessarily have the same level of support. We could also think about how work experience is an enriching experience, which might help young people to make decisions about the future. Okay. Need a few things in my disagree column then. So we might be thinking about the time pressure that it's placed on our young people, especially since COVID, just because there's so many different things for them to pack in, and we know that kind of time to relax and socialise and to focus on well-being is important. And if we're packing in an academic curriculum as well as part-time work or work experience, that can be really tough for our young people. We might say that there's too much pressure on young people already, so need to spend time on well-being instead. And we could say that instead maybe our young people should focus on their exams and studies instead of on work. Okay, because obviously if you don't have that kind of core knowledge and those qualifications, then how are you going to get work in the future? So I've kind of jotted down my ideas in a fairly random order, and now I'm going to decide what order I'm going to write about them in my article. So I'm going to start with my main line of argument, and I'm going to go for agree as being my kind of main argument, and I'm going to call my agree argument the X argument, just for a kind of bit of shorthand. And I'm going to choose my strongest idea, which is going to lead my article. So I think I'm going to I think I'm going to go with that second one as my strongest idea. So I'm going to label that X1, that's my main line of argument. And then I'm going to go for the first idea, so I'm going to put that as X2. That's going to be my second paragraph. Then I'm going to go over to the disagree side, because I want to show that I appreciate the other side of the argument, but that I don't necessarily agree with it. So I'm going to group that first and second one together, because I think they work nicely together. And I'm going to call that O. That's my other side of the argument. I think I'm just going to leave that one for now. I'm just going to delete that. I don't think I'm going to use that idea. I don't think I'll have time in my exam. And then that leaves me with the enriching experience to come back to. So as I write, I'm going to go X1, X2, O, and then back to X3. As I said, I'm going to show you a really basic method for responding to this question, and the other videos following this are going to layer on those additional techniques which are going to really elevate your answer. So with this particular method, we're going to start with the phrase, imagine this. And this is a really good way of starting our introduction to a bit of persuasive writing, partly because it already includes so many of those devices and techniques which are supposed to show off to the examiner. So we start with an imperative verb, imagine, and we've also got our colon in there to show that we can use punctuation. So we're going to start with imagine this, and we're going to present a really stark, one-sided response to the idea of work experience. And then we're going to move into the reason why work experience is so important. So I'm going to start with imagining a world in which work experience doesn't exist. And that's going to help us highlight actually the reasons why we need it. So imagine this, a world in which young people finish their A-levels and step out of the dark, claustrophobic exam hall into the bright summer sunshine. And what you notice here is that I'm almost telling a story in what I'm doing, because we know that stories engage our readers. So that's going to help us to write a compelling answer, which is mentioned on the mark scheme. And it's also going to help us to use descriptive techniques, which is going to tick off that language devices criteria as well. Because as you notice, I've got some adjectives here in order to describe the exam hall, as well as to describe this summer. And that juxtaposition of darkness and brightness is going to help us to build that language device as well. So I'm going to continue telling my story. So a few days I spent reveling in their newfound freedom. I'm just going to make a little reference to the poetry course here. As these half-fledged birds start to enter the adult world. And of course, what you can see here is that I've really concentrated on my verb choice. I've not gone for enjoying, which I could quite easily have done, or I could even have just left the word reveling out completely and said a few days I spent and then you find freedom. But I've chosen the word reveling because it really captures that sense of complete freedom and enjoyment and immersion in the new world. And then I've got the image of the half-fledged birds, which, as I've said, I've borrowed from the poetry, but I'm using imagery there. So again, that's one of our linguistic devices that we need to be using. So then I'm going to start moving into the reasons why work experience is so important. So however soon these young people realise that in order to support themselves and to fully enjoy adult life, they need one thing: money. And I'm using my colon there as well. And one thing that you can do with a colon is use it to introduce a single word that you want to really emphasize. And the word here, obviously, that I want to emphasize is money, because that is what we need work for. Or one of the reasons why we need work anyway. So just to continue my story, so yet with no real experience of the working world, are they going to be able to find useful employment which interests and fulfills them, as well as helping them to pay the bills. And you'll notice there that I'm adding a rhetorical question, which again is a language device, but it's also forcing me to put a question mark in, which is helping me to tick the punctuation box, because questions are often phrased starting with a question word such as hi, for example. That's also helping me to get a range of sentence starters there. So I'm constantly thinking about what the examiner is looking for and making sure I'm including that as I'm going through my answer. And here I'm going to move into the really addressing this statement and the topic. So this is why work experience is a crucial aspect of education. Semicolon. Semicolons can be used to add extra information. So we've got a statement at the start of the sentence, you put your semicolon and you put your extra information afterwards. So it means that students are able to learn about the world of employment. So that they know how to navigate a job interview and to hold down, I'm running out of space, delete question, and to hold down their first post with ease. So I'm just going to highlight the sentence starters and the techniques that I've used, and you can apply these to almost any question. So starting with the phrase imagine this, and then a world in which, and then you introduce a really stark, clear picture. You might use the connective however to then change that picture slightly. The rhetorical question, as I've said, is a really useful way of getting that variety of language devices and punctuation in. And then this is why, because we're really kind of grasping on to the topic of the question there. Now we're going to look at writing the main body of our argument. So we've written our introduction and we're going to choose the first idea from our planning table, which was about how work experience can help people in interviews and to secure a job in later life. And in order to do this, I'm going to tell a story. So I'm going to create a character. I'm going to call him Sam, and I'm going to tell Sam's story as he looks for work, and how the work experience that he did at school has really helped him with that. So I'm addressing the question and giving reasons why work experience is good, but I'm doing that through the method of narrative of storytelling. The reason why I'm choosing to do that is that gives me the real sense of interest in the text, because we know that people like stories, people like narratives, and so I tick that box on the mark scheme that said that the text should be compelling. And it's also going to help me to use a range of descriptive techniques as I write. Okay, so I'm going to say that finding employment can be incredibly daunting and a real challenge for inexperienced young people. As Sam, it's called Sam Dixon, as Sam Dixon discovered when he finished his A-levels and began to look for a part-time job to support him through university. Now, as you'll notice, as I've been writing this sentence, I've been considering my punctuation and my sentence starters. So I'm starting here with a verb. I've also included a dash in my sentence in order to really elevate my punctuation. So having navigated the tricky process of writing a job application, Sam then had to face an intimidating panel of interviewers who seemed intent on quizzing him on every aspect of his life so far. And what you'll notice here is that I'm adding adjectives as I'm writing to really enhance the description and to show the examiner that I can control a range of different linguistic devices. So I want to show how important work experience is. So I'm going to say that Sam had an advantage over some of the other applicants. He had already completed work experience in the catering industry when he was at school. A week spent learning how to serve customers in a busy environment, calmly dealing with complaints about cold tea and burnt toast. A little bit of humour never goes amiss. What would another problem be? And learning how to stay on his feet all day was excellent preparation for this real interview. So in that sentence, you'll notice that I've got a list of 3 things, which is why I was trying to get that third thing there as I was writing. And I've added some really specific details so that we can really create a sense that Sam being a real character facing kind of genuine challenges in his life. So due to his previous experience, Sam was able to speak with confidence and gave detailed responses to all the questions, which were mercilessly, let's put mercilessly in, so mercilessly fired at him. I've put mercilessly in there because it's an adverb and I want to show that I can describe in detail, so I'm not just putting the verb in, I'm also looking to show how that action is delivered. So which were mercilessly fired at him across the table. I'm going to add another adjective in there actually to describe the table, the impersonal table. Okay, it was no surprise then when Sam received a phone call later that day telling him that he had been successful and could start the following week. Okay, so what I've been doing, I suppose, is using this story to really illustrate the importance of work experience. And you can see that this is much more interesting than just writing a list. You know, firstly, it's important because of this, and secondly, it's important because of this. This narrative is kind of drawing us, taking us through those ideas, but in a much more compelling way. So I'm just going to finish this paragraph off. So for Sam, this was more than just a job. This was his ticket to university. Now, as I said earlier, if you have a semicolon, you would write the start of your sentence, so you'd write a statement. So for Sam, this was more than just a job. You have your semicolon, and then you can add more information after it to explain the first part of the sentence. So for Sam, this was more than just a job. This was his ticket to university, as he was now able to top up his student loan with his own money. I'm just going to link it back to the question really clearly, and all because he had had the opportunity to complete work experience at school. So there we go. So we have our first paragraph, our first reason why work experience is really important. So in my subsequent paragraphs, I would continue this story of Sam, kind of moving through his experience of work and linking it back to what he learned with work experience in school. So my next paragraph might be about how Sam had really developed confidence during his work experience at school and how that helped him to deal with a challenging customer in his current job, and so on. The last thing I'm going to show you is how to write your conclusion. So I've got my paragraph here about Sam, and then I would have written my second main line of argument, I would have written the other side of the argument, I would have written my third point, and then I would have moved on to my conclusion. Now, it's really nice to use a circular structure to demonstrate that you can use a range of structural techniques. And so I'm going to go back to the imagine this idea that I started the text with. So I'm going to say, now imagine this. So it's echoing back the start of the text. Again, it's demonstrating that I can use a range of punctuation as well. So what if Sam had never been given the opportunity to complete work experience at school? And again, rhetorical questions, so I'm getting a question mark in there. I wouldn't use too many rhetorical questions, maybe 2 or possibly 3 across the whole text, but they can be a useful method to engage your reader and to show off a range of skills. So what if he had been told to simply, oh, I've got 2 beans there, better delete that one. What if he'd been told simply focus on his academic studies and had not been able to enrich his education with a visit to a real place of employment? Perhaps he would not have been able to secure the job which helped him through university. Okay, and then I'm going to zoom out from Sam back to the big picture, because obviously that's what the questions asked us, why should all young people engage in work experience? So this is, of course, what we want for all our young people. Yes, grades are important, but they must be balanced with practical educational experiences too. And there we go. Done. We've got a full set of ideas about work experience. We've got our introduction, we've got 4 paragraphs taking us on the journey with Sam and taking us on a journey through the reasons why work experience is important, and then we've kind of used that circular structure in our conclusion to really reinforce the idea that we think work experience is important.